Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's MedVR VR training program to advance culture, competency, and communication webinar. I'm Jennifer Waters, MXR Project Manager at MDIC, the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, and I'm thrilled to have accepted an invitation to serve as a guest host today. As MedVR and MDIC share a common goal of advancing the medical XR community, and I look forward to exploring this topic further with you today. To start, I just want to give a brief overview of MDIC and the projects that I work with. So, as you all may know, MDIC is the first ever public-private partnership created with the sole objective of advancing the regulatory science around the development and assessment of medical devices and diagnostics. And MDIC membership and participation is open to nonprofit, industry, and government organizations that are substantially involved in medical device research, development, treatment, education, or in the promotion of public health, and that have expertise or interest in regulatory science. Members of MDIC, they all share a vision of providing U.S. citizens with timely access to high quality and safe, effective medical devices without unnecessary delays. MDIC has programs and projects that span across the total product lifecycle of devices and diagnostics. And I would encourage everyone to visit us at www.mdic.org for more info, and send a quick email to me at jwaters@mdic.org if you have any questions. And I will also leave that contact information in the chat below. Currently, the MXR program is working to complete their first landscape framework titled Medical Extended Reality Assessment Framework Report on the current landscape and gap analysis. This document is scheduled to be released Q4 24. And if you're interested in being on the list to receive those updates, feel free to send me an email about that as well. We also have a survey that went out earlier this week, and we are asking SMEs to complete that by Friday, July 12th. This survey will help us to collect valuable information and kind of gauge interest to contribute to the collaborative work in the pre-competitive space, along with colleagues from industry, FDA, and other stakeholder groups. And I would also place that link in the chat for the survey. And then finally, we are charting the course for expanding the MXR initiative at MDIC from the current focus of surgical applications to a broader patient-facing applications. We are recruiting SMEs who are interested to join us in that effort. And if you are interested to learn more, please email me directly or complete the survey that I linked in the chat. And moving forward, today's webinar will introduce MedVR Virtual Reality, Cultural Competencies, and Communication Training Program, C3VR. This program aims to enhance communication skills and reduce implicit bias among medical students and physicians. Today's discussion will examine the conceptual and technical foundations of C3VR, share results from pilot tests, and discuss further strategies for making C3VR a clinically effective tool tailored to specific racial groups, geographic areas, health issues. The goal of MedVR is to improve healthcare outcomes for vulnerable populations. If during the webinar you have any questions, please use the Q&A button below, and do feel free to chat and share your thoughts and valuable information in the chat box that's labeled chat. Today's moderator will be Dr. Susan Persky. Dr. Susan Persky is an associate investigator with the Social and Behavioral Research Branch at the National Human Genome Research Institute within NIH. She is the founding director of the Immersive Simulation Program, which is an emerging tech research lab that was founded in 2006. Dr. Persky has also published extensively in the areas of health communication, genomics, and virtual reality methods and application. She has provided scientific leadership through services on bodies such as the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Virtual and Augmented Reality and the Veterans Administration Immersive Executive Roundtable. Dr. Persky has presented her research in venues such as the Smithsonian Institute and the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Persky.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm really pleased to be here today to be able to moderate this session with our two fantastic speakers. I'm going to keep the introductions relatively short. Won't go through all of their accolades because I want them to have a lot of time to talk about the really important work that they're doing. So we have today Dr. Charee Thompson. Dr. Thompson is an associate professor of health communication at the University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign. She studies patient-provider interactions, focusing on the role of communication in how patients and providers navigate uncertainties, particularly those associated with conditions that disproportionately affect women, conditions that are chronic, non-visible, not well understood, underfunded, associated with stigma. So she develops and delivers and assesses theoretically grounded communication trainings for healthcare providers. We also have today Dr. Joseph Maurice. Dr. Maurice is professor and chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Creighton University School of Medicine in Omaha. Nationally, since 2016, he's served as a delegate to the American Medical Association, promoting women's health issues and policy development. He focuses on disparities in obstetrics, gynecology, including educating medical students and residents about disparities in Black maternal health care, as well as the availability of minimally invasive gynecologic surgery for Black and other minority women. I've been following the work that they collaborate on in the literature, and I'm really excited to have them here today to tell us more about that work. So I'll just remind you to please put your questions in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring and moderating questions later on, but for now, I will go ahead and hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Susan, and thanks to my colleague, Dr. Joseph Maurice, for being here today. I am so excited to chat with you all today about a project that we've been working on since the pandemic started, really. So it's, excuse me. Thank you. Again, our project is called C3VR. The 3 C's are for cultural competency and communication. I've listed here some of our other colleagues that I'll speak about a bit later. I'm recognizing that this is really a large project that involves a lot of great people. Our project, as Jennifer mentioned, is hopefully our goal is to create something that can be used across patient populations and to address disparities in healthcare broadly or for specific patient populations. But our first initial foundational case is Black maternal health. And like many of us probably know, Black women experience higher rates of maternal morbidity and mortality than any other race. In fact, that number is about 3 to 4. So maternal mortality for non-Hispanic Black women is 3 to 4 times higher than white women. These effects also trickle down sort of to Black infants. We know that preterm birth rate of Black infants is 50% higher than other races, than white women. And we also know that such babies are often born with low birth weights and have a greater risk of sudden infant death syndrome. So these are some of the mortality stats, but we also know that Black women also experience increased stress during their pregnancy journey throughout, that they experience increased complications or risk of complications during the birthing process, and that they are also not as likely, they're twice as likely not to receive postpartum care. They're also at a greater risk for postpartum depression. And my goal here is to stress just how deep and problematic these disparities are for Black mothers. And from a narrative perspective, there was a study done where they collected hundreds of narratives of Black mothers. And what they found, a common theme, was that the feeling of being devalued and disrespected by medical providers was a constant theme. Dr. Maurice and I have collected data from Black mothers to help inform our training. And so I wanted to share one snippet that was provided by a mother that she wanted us to share as we move forward with our work.
I'm angry. That's when I had horrific back labor and had to push for over 3 hours with my first baby. The epidural failed. I was told that it happens sometimes and they couldn't do anything about it. It took my body months to recover. I was angry that I wasn't given great care as it took my body months to recover. This experience was disempowering. I was in so much pain and nothing could be done.
As this example illustrates, These women face a lot of disparities in healthcare that are attributed in large part to poor competency and implicit bias from providers. Whether providers intend to provide care that is read as racist or are bias laden is different than how it is perceived and how it's felt by these women. Many healthcare professionals, research constantly bears out, like most of us in the population, the healthcare professionals and practitioners carry implicit bias that affects the delivery of communication. We know among the Black population that these bias influences communication in ways that are more overt to really covert. And so more covert things might be like explicit sort of racist comments, etc. But we know in more covert ways it can shine through, such as normalizing of pain and minimizing as well as neglect. So for example, a quick research findings. Among the Black population, even when seriously ill, Black Americans are less likely than whites to experience discussions about their with their healthcare providers about prognosis, personal goals, values, and end-of-life treatment preferences. They also receive less clinical attention in terms of minutes and fewer diagnostic tests than white patients, net of other health factors. And so to drive home the point again, the biases that providers have and the lack of culturally competent communication skills is partly responsible for the health disparities we see. And I want to stress that I do not assume that communication is the panacea for all of the issues. There are structural issues and access issues as well. We're trying to address one portion of that. So we need cultural competency training to help providers connect better with their patients while also mitigating their own bias to provide better care. So how do you go about creating such a training? This was our task. First, in my neck of the woods in training and development, the first thing you have to do is conduct a needs assessment. You have to first determine what your learner needs. And so we collected stories and opinions and thoughts from over 150 Black mothers, as well as physicians who provide Black maternal health care, to ask them what they think that physicians who provide excellent, culturally competent communication and healthcare, what they need to do. And so this is what Black mothers said. These larger pieces are about 20%. And so if you notice, the largest piece is empathy, followed by thoroughness, listening, tone and word choice, awareness of bias and blind spots, openness, humility, and individualized care. And it's not just patients who believe that providers need this. When we talk to providers, they say, hey, I have empathy and understanding, but I'm not really sure how to put this in practice. And so as communication folks, we're really excited to hear that, that there's a need to actually work on the communication part and to actually practice. So you first do a needs assessment, and then what do? You build an amazing interdisciplinary team. When we first started this project, which started here at the University of Illinois at Urbana, Champaign, we were working with Dr. Maurice, who's at Creighton University, and is an physician. And then we were also working with AirV Labs, who is our primary VR developer. We also work with engineers in healthcare systems engineering. Folks in neuropsychology have worked on this project, particularly on parts that have to do with recognizing bias. Folks who are experts in training and development, as well as healthcare disparities largely in theater, because that's really helped make our immersive experience really lifelike and our assets really true to life. So you build an amazing team, and then you make some commitments. Our team is committed to a few things, and I want to preview just so you know where we come from foundationally and the lens through which we see this project. The first is a commitment to reflexivity. We recognize that we have not been through what Black women have been through and Black mothers. And so we come at this very humbly, and we are attempting to create something for Black mothers, but also with them, and I'll talk about that shortly. So it's being reflexive about our own positionality and being humble about it. Second is the approach known as intersectionality, recognizing that the way that Black women experience racism and oppression is different than white women or other racialized women do, due to history and the unique contributions of that intersection of gender and race. Like I said before, part of reflexivity and recognizing that we do not share the same experiences as the women that we're trying to help through this training is that we include Black mothers in the creation of our training, as well as Black clinicians who are mothers themselves. And then finally, our goal is to not only teach cultural competency as a set of skills or things that people can master or physicians can master, but really trying to stress more what is known as cultural humility, which is a lifelong commitment to learning and being critical of oneself, and really vulnerability to admit you're wrong and that you can grow. And so those four kind of philosophies underpin the training as a whole. Okay, so the training itself. First, we want to acknowledge and thank a few of our internal funders, including the Carle Illinois College of Medicine, as well as the Jump Arches Endowment through the healthcare engineering systems here at UIUC in conjunction with OSF Healthcare. As far as cultural, when we thought about creating a cultural competency training, we of course looked to trainings that had been done. And what we found is that existing cultural competency trainings, of which there are many of us have been through lots of DEI trainings, et cetera. What we find is that many of them are not comprehensive according to the standards set forth by the American or the Association of American Medical Colleges. And by what that we mean is that according to the AAMC, students who have completed cultural competency training should be able to address their biases and interact with a diverse range of individuals. What we find when we review the trainings, however, is that many programs are focused on reducing bias and increasing cultural knowledge, which is great, right? But not really helping physicians in training interact with diverse patients. Or trainings include knowledge and practice, but don't really recognize or spend time talking about bias and how to mitigate it and how to work through it. So we are trying to do both. How do you address your bias and how do you also improve your skills? We are coming at this from a communication perspective on cultural competency, and the model forwards that competency is comprised of skills, attitudes, and knowledge. So you have to believe that cultural competency is a good thing and valuable and something you should do. You need to have the skills to do so, and you need to know how to do it. And so those three facets of cultural competency undergird our training itself. And then, so that is sort of the content of the training and the pillars. And then we look to VR. Why are we using VR? As many folks in this group know, VR affordances are particularly helpful, I think, in this space. And as was mentioned earlier, so much of the VR applications that we see, this kind of burgeoning set of trainings that we see in the medical education landscape on anatomy lessons or surgical applications, I really think that our training moves us a little forward to look at how we can use VR to enhance the interactions themselves. And so we think that the immersive experiences can really help students and learners feel physically present and foster that empathy and understanding towards patients with different backgrounds. We think that the sense of presence that VR creates can help evoke strong emotional responses and simulate real-world scenarios. That the interactivity and the learning is really helpful to in the VR environment so that they can interact with multiple scenarios, which could be endless within the VR application, and that they can receive immediate feedback within it as well. It's also a safe practice environment, given how charged DEI is, particularly today, and how sensitive and difficult it is. I know even for myself to engage in these conversations and to admit how you could be better, and to provide a safe space to practice skills is really important, particularly because some research shows that the current model of using standardized patients can be harmful to standardized patients to the extent that having someone practice their skills on mitigating bias can be harmful to those on the receiving end. We know that it can also be more standardized. We can make the training more uniform in its quality and access. We can scale it up and distribute it easily and affordably. And then finally, through repeated exposure to diverse scenarios, VR not only boosts student engagement, but also aids in developing cultural competency. So for all these reasons, we chose VR. So let me show you a snapshot of our entire training. It is a 3-part curriculum. The top part talks about, if you can read that, explains the purpose of that part. And the bottom is about how we did it. So part one, the goal is to help learners become aware of implicit bias and its impact on communication dynamics, patient interactions, and overall care provision. Our thought was, given that conversations about racism and one's bias can invoke or evoke defensiveness, we thought we would scaffold the experience by first having them watch and interact in a scenario to say, hey, do you see the bias here? Does it feel, uncomfortable? Perhaps it should. Let's go through and show you some of the stereotypes that are grounded in intersectionality, so that you know why these things are wrong. And then two, once you can see it somewhere else, two, can we have you turn inward and pinpoint your own biases and couple those with teaching effective strategies to navigate and mitigate them in clinical settings? And so within that, we have guided recognition of implicit bias. We have some mindfulness breathing activities, as well as skills for listening, shared decision-making, and empathy. And then finally, assuming that you see the bias and how it negatively affects, we've helped you think through your own and learn some communication skills. And three, we can have you practice with a patient of that population. Here's Black maternal health. So you can develop proficiency in your communication skills with patients. So you can practice with a patient using generative artificial intelligence. Okay, so the development briefly, as you kind of saw in the last one, this is how we did it. So far we have only developed, let me go back for a second, I'm sorry. We have developed a beta of part one, and part three has a prototype. I'm going to show you clips of both of those. And part two, this is just a rendering, and we have not fully developed that one or a prototype quite yet. Okay, part one. We first developed a script, and this is where our theater expert came in. And we, in a simulation lab, recorded interactions between actors that were hired, professional actors. 360-degree videos were used as assets, and we included pop-up windows. And I think my developer is not with us today. I think we used Unity, or they used Unity for that. And then in part three, again, we developed the script. We hired the same actor, so it would be there would be some continuity across the training and the experience, using 360-degree video. And then because of budget and because this is a prototype, we created a dialogue tree and manually fed it into the NLP language model. In the future, we would love to be able to use generative AI. Stay tuned for that one. So if you have your volume up, you might check it. I'm going to show you a clip of part one. It's a short version of it, and then I will show you a clip of part three.
Watch this scene again and note how implicit bias informs Dr. Flynn's communication and how his communication
cries. I'm all over the place. I'm scared. I'm scared.
Is the baby's father in the picture?
My
Is he in the home?
husband. My husband. Wonderful father. Wonderful husband.
Okay, all right. I have to ask. We can't be too careful. We wanted to make sure that you and the baby are safe.
he only faces her when his bias is activated, when she says scared. And her tone changes because she becomes angry.
Okay, so that was part one, just a snippet of the experience. And then here is part three, recorded through the headset with yours truly as the learner. Good morning. How are you?
I'm well.
How is everything going at home?
Overwhelming, to be honest.
How is breastfeeding going?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How is breastfeeding going?
I'm not breastfeeding.
How is bottle feeding going?
It's going good.
Have you established with a pediatrician?
Yes, they're great.
Has your menstrual cycle resumed?
No.
Are you having any pain?
No.
Any problems with urination or bowel movements? Okay, I could probably stop it there. What I wanted to point out is that if I were to replay another one of these clips for you, the patient would say something different. And you caught that probably when I asked about how breastfeeding was going, and she said, can you repeat that? And that was what we embedded when the machine learning or the NLP model did not register whatever our sort of like trigger word was. So there it should have been breastfeeding. And so it didn't pick that up. So we trained it to say, can you repeat that? And then try again. And then she's like, okay. And then she says, I'm not doing it. And then if you notice, ask about bottle feeding, because she said no, ask about bottle feeding came in to nudge the learner to make sure that they asked about that. So using a really manual technique, and the best we could do at the time with our funding, this is a snippet of the experience that we created. Because part one was the most fully developed, we conducted a pilot test. And that pilot test is published here, and I will make sure to put in the chat the link for that through PubMed. But this was recently published this year. So what we did is we did a pilot test of part one. And what we did is we hypothesized that by engaging in the training that learners would report greater attitudes towards implicit bias. And I don't mean like greater bias attitudes. I mean better attitudes about addressing implicit bias. That their attitudes towards providing culturally competent medical care would also increase following the training, and that they would feel more efficacious in their communication following the training. We also wanted to know, because improvement is an iterative process, how they intend to use the training and how we can improve the training via their evaluations of engagement and effectiveness, as well as open-ended comments. So we recruited 30 medical students and residents to participate. I apologize for how light that is, who were about 27 years old, which makes sense given that they're medical students and residents. Most were female. And racial dispersion was probably pretty consistent with the area. Most of these folks were, I think all the folks were in Illinois. And then what they did is they did a pre-training survey in a lab. They did the application or the experience and the head-mounted display, and then we did a post-training survey, and then we're paid $50 for their time. So these are our findings, and I'm trying to highlight them so it's not just a table of numbers for you. So attitudes towards addressing implicit bias through education increased from pre-experience to post-experience, and you see that was a significant change. The second hypothesis was about attitudes towards providing culturally competent care. And at least measurement-wise, those attitudes break down into 4 subscales. And that includes, I believe that I should know about my patient's opinions. I believe I should know their beliefs. I believe I should know the context in which they live to provide better care. And I believe that I should provide quality care to be culturally competent. And so the 2 that increased from pre to post were beliefs, so understanding your patient's beliefs, and that cultural competence is key to providing quality healthcare. And you saw that those increased pre to post. And then finally was communication efficacy, which we also saw a significant increase as well. So overall, and we did not have an experimental condition as a pilot. I recognize that's a pretty significant limitation, but we do see that we moved the needle here a bit. As far as our research questions about did they like the training? Did they learn from it? How do they use it? On a scale of 1 to 5, they rated it fairly engaging as well as effective. Some of the quotes and things that they said are here. So it's pretty true to life. They say, I've seen examples of these aggressions by providers during trainings. The module depicts accurate experiences. And as far as learning itself, they said they like the breakdown of each scene because they learned things that they hadn't noticed before. So we believe our findings are promising, but more is needed. As I said before, our argument is that training should not be about specific awareness of race-based healthcare disparities, but also how to put those knowledges to practice through development of skills. Some of our cultural competence measures did not increase. It could be really small sample size, et cetera. There's also something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So perhaps by engaging in the training, you learners realize what they don't know. And so sometimes you don't see increases pre to post. It could also be that we gave them a video, showed them a video of a really poor interaction. Perhaps we could have really boosted other aspects of our measures if we also showed a positive interaction. They also gave us good feedback on how we will improve moving forward. More interactivity, shorter videos, more rapid speech, or at least the ability to change the speed of the speech. They also asked for positive interactions. It's one thing to tell people this is not what you should do, and another to give them something aspirational. And really, we think it should be both. And in the future, it'd be great to include sort of biometric markers of stress and implicit bias, because we know implicit bias is implicit, so we're often not aware of it. And so other ways of measuring impact would be really important, including physiological responses, increases in or patient outcomes themselves. Can we provide this training to physicians and actually see better patient outcomes, whether it's something like satisfaction or something more conversational, to actual things that get us closer to better health, like adherence, and even reports of symptoms. We recognize that this training exists in a larger landscape of DEI and cultural competency that is really large and diverse, that shows mixed effects, that often don't show long-term or very durable in their effects. There's lots of complex factors that affect cultural competency. I don't think that one training is going to be, it's going to change someone for the rest of their career. In fact, research shows that ongoing education is most effective, as well as trainings that complement one each other or are multimodal, or that are integrated in a larger curriculum themselves. So we have one little piece, and we're excited about moving forward with it and building it out and making sure that it complements other things that medical schools and residency programs, et cetera, are doing. So our future work and current goals. One, we've recently applied for NIH funding to help build out the entire training, and hopefully so we can assess it at a larger scale, improving upon, not just completing it, but improving upon it based on feedback that we received and that I talked about earlier. We are currently collecting data continuously. That paper that I shared with you has 30 participants, but Dr. Maurice is heading up data collection in other locations, just to, one, if it's having an impact, it's great. People can take advantage of it. And two, so that we have continued feedback for how to improve it. Our goal, hopefully, is to move the natural language processing model for part 3 from something less manual and using generative AI, for which AirV Lab has its own proprietary software, and also to revise part 1 itself. We also want to, in the big picture, and like I said, our goal is to create a clinically viable tool that can be tailored for different kinds of learners and different type of specialties and different patient populations, so that we can hopefully impact medical education across the career spectrum itself. We also want to offer different health contexts. Dr. Maurice and I are co-leading a project that is not only about Black maternal health, but also about Black women's pain. As pain is invisible, and in particular, women are dismissed for pain, it's really important that we teach physicians how to be empathic and recognize it and validate pain. So that's sort of the next iteration outside of Black maternal health. And like I said, our goal is to tailor it to diverse patient audiences and diverse learners. Thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to your questions.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. I will remind the audience that questions can go in the Q&A box. This was a really fantastic presentation. I have a whole bunch of questions, so I'm happy to, ask all of my questions, but also happy to field others. So thank you again for this presentation. I think one of the things that the presentation did really well was to underscore how much effort and thought really goes into responsible content development. The ideas around reflexivity, cultural humility, include, nothing about me without me, that kind of ethos. And I'm wondering, in addition to sort of mapping out the script, the clinical case, how does that translate into making design choices for the VR environments? When you go for the look, the feel of the interfaces, obviously everything in VR is a design choice. nothing is really organically there to begin with. So I'm curious about how, aside from sort of the text content, how you go about making design choices for the VR environments and, what they're going to eventually look like and feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. This is a place where I feel like I'm really being challenged and learning to grow, is learning about user experience and creating something that is not only interactive for the sake of having things that people can click on and engage, but what does it mean for your color choices? For example, in the brief clip you watched, what the learners first do is they watch, so let me back up. We took a typical postpartum visit, so it should be familiar to all folks who've rotated through or have been through OBGYN, and we cut it into 4 segments. And what we did is we embedded each with a stereotypical implicit bias or stereotype of Black women, and we ran it through and had them just watch it. And then we ran it through and said, did you notice? And then a little red box popped up and said, this is a stereotype about single Black mothers, or this is a stereotype about missing Black fathers. And so we chose red to call attention to it. And then we asked them to watch it through again, where we had them really hone in, and what you saw was on the effect that it has on them. And so we chose blue intentionally to signal affect and emotion, and then yellow as a complementary contrasting color. And so I think we were intentional about our color choices in that, and that one other thing is that a lot of trainings use sort of avatar based. And one thing that's important to me is that given the range of physicians that I hope to reach with this, that we have the most photorealistic VR experiences possible. Because look, my experience, it's all different, right? Is that sometimes if it looks too cartoonish, or, if you're trying to engage with an actual patient, if it doesn't look like an actual patient, it's not as realistic, then the training might not be seen as credible. And so that's a choice that we made also, is using 360 video. It's also a lot cheaper, honestly. So for us, it serves both of those purposes. So I don't know if I answered all of your questions. Those are the things that jumped out to me.
Dr. Thompson, I'd like to kind of weigh in. First of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. This is why we have a multidisciplinary group. Dr. Thompson is a communications professor. I'm a practicing OBGYN. We have 2 other physicians, OBGYNs, Black women, who are consultants on this project. So our goal is to try and recreate what that scene looks like in a postpartum visit. So it's deliberate that the doctor is actually sitting at a computer, kind of mostly watching the computer. And that's one of the subtle ways that we discuss racism in terms of Black maternal health. One of the things we struggle with, I think, with the script is that it's very easy to bring out blatantly racist sort of comments from a physician. It's harder, though, to discuss the more subtle sorts of statements that come out of a physician's mouth. For instance, how do we convey, the patient that's saying to herself, maybe this is just all in my head, because that's the more subtle form, but that never really comes out in a conversation. So what we tried to do was just to purposely give the viewer, in this case, undergraduate medical learners and graduate medical learners, what that environment looks like. And that's a very familiar sort of scene within the clinic that anyone who is in medical school or in residency would be familiar with.
Great. We're starting to get some interesting questions in. I want to take my prerogative to ask one more question of my own first that I think is kind of related to this question. I think a lot of us who are in this space have observed that, those who probably most need certain kinds of training, particularly, bias training, are not the first ones to sort of walk through the door and volunteer. And I'm wondering if there is anything about sort of the design, the use of VR, anything that might make it more likely that a training like this could capture or change attitudes than some of the more traditional routes of bias training.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, we know that we need to do more work in helping to train people in terms of disparities of health, not only with Black maternal health, but with all underserved patients. What we're finding is that, the required PowerPoint presentations that everybody has to sit through. I mean, maybe you pick up maybe 2 to 5% of that. We were hoping with using the virtual reality modality that it would be more of a vibrant sort of experience. And anecdotally, with the study we're running here at Creighton, is that we're getting that sort of feedback that this is very, very powerful. And we're hoping that that helps bring it home. But you're right, it's interesting. We decided, so in the pilot study, as Dr. Thompson previously discussed, we use both resident physicians in obstetrics and gynecology and medical students who are rotating through their third-year clerkship. And what we were finding is that that may not be the most homogeneous population. So for the second iteration of the study, the larger version of it, we decided just to move towards third-year medical students rotating through their clerkship on obstetrics and gynecology, because we feel like that their training is at the same level, and every medical student has to rotate through obstetrics and gynecology, and they may have not as many formed biases about taking care of patients, underserved patients in the healthcare setting. So we're trying to get them in as early as possible. But again, anecdotally, and I was kind of surprised about this, because to be a third-year medical student in the clerkship, it's sort of like the go-go times in terms of your medical school. This is when you're on the floors, you're working with doctors, you're trying to impress the residents and the attending physicians, and you want to just delve into everything. It's interesting, we're only finding about 50% of the students actually give informed consent for the study. It's one of the confounding factors that we can't really figure out. And we have, as a part of the IRB process here at Creighton, because of my position as a chair, I'm in a sort of a power position. So the study is actually discussed and the informed consent is obtained by my research nurses who are not a part of this department, nor do they have any sort of responsibility for the grading of it, because the IRB was worried that because of my position, people would feel compelled to do it, which we totally get and we are totally following. But it's interesting, and we keep collecting the data, but only about half of the eligible students sign up for the study. So it's, to answer your question, how do we get them motivated? It's hard because we prefer maybe the carrot as opposed to the stick, because the stick is not working, right? You sit down and you watch all these PowerPoint presentations, and people are just whizzing through the slides to make sure that they complete it. So it is a significant challenge, and we're looking to address that.
So there are a few questions about sort of data collection, validation, those sorts of things. So there is a question from one of the audience members about how you validated the content development for the scripts. Sort of what did that process look like, and what did any validation of that content look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So several sources. One, we consulted with existing literature, of which there is unfortunately too large of a literature of narrative accounts of Black women's maternal health care experiences. Two, we conducted that needs assessment, and so we have transcripts. That little clip I showed you, mothers could submit something they wanted to say to doctors, and so we used those as well. And then also we consulted with the clinicians on the team, including two who are Black mothers themselves, to craft what is within a typical postpartum visit, but some common stereotypes or forms of bias. And so from my academic background, I wanted to make sure that whatever stereotypes were both common and resonate, but also could demonstrate intersectionality if that's something we wanted to point out, which we did. So it's sort of a tripartite triangulation of getting clinicians, existing literature, and the data that we had to validate the scripts themselves. For the latter part, the NLP, what we did is I worked with Dr. Dillard on the project and said, please take me through the first postpartum visit. And is there a standard for that? And there is a standard set of sort of like questions or things you're supposed to cover. And so we just created a script based on that and had the actress give one of like 5 to 10 responses to said questions. So, are you breastfeeding? No, I'm not breastfeeding. No, I don't want to. No, I hadn't thought about it. So all these sorts of things just to provide some variety. And then we recorded those. So that's how that happened, is mostly in consultation with a clinician.
There are no vetted scripts or studies taking a look how to demonstrate racism, and this is what I think the power of our study is. We're hoping that this becomes one of the validated sort of scripts that can be used. But in consultation with two of our Black OBGYNs who I've been colleagues with for over 20 years, they keep us in the right lane and help us understand where Black women suffer from these sort of injustices. But Dr. Thompson is right. The postpartum visit is very, very standardized. And that is the easy part. The question is that how do we incorporate these biases from a physician to a patient within this standardized clinic visit?
Right. And so I have another question sort of about this measurement, this validation process. We are thankfully moving on from an era where the idea of using VR for bias education was booming, but not necessarily evidence-based. So it's exciting to see evidence-based from the beginning to, I'm sure, to the end. I'm curious about your thoughts about the right approach for this in terms of the studies that are conducted. What is, you talked a little bit about, improving patient health as sort of the distal outcome, the thing we care about at the end of the day. I mean, obviously it's a really hard outcome to measure. It takes time. This one intervention is probably enough. All of the things you kind of talked about. What do you think is the sweet spot? What do you think ultimately are the kinds of outcomes or things you would want to measure, when you're testing this intervention as a whole, in an audience? What are the kinds of things you would like to see this being able to shift? And just to sort of add in another question that's come in, over how long of a time frame? Is this a one-shot intervention, or would you ultimately imagine it being sort of a longer process? Because I would imagine those would lead to different outcomes you could test.
Yeah, Dr. Maurice, if I can take that first part of that question, I think you could speak more to the medical education part. But yeah, you're right. That is such a difficult question because it's easier to measure proximal outcomes around a conversation, around a training. It's much more difficult to measure distal outcomes, particularly when any number of things could happen to a patient between your conversation with them and some ultimate health outcome, whatever that is. Also, patients see other providers. If you're a medical student rotation, they may not be your long-term patient. You may not develop a relationship with them. So it's really difficult. My thought is that if we can get physicians in training really early and set expectations and standards for communication, and they get this more often and they get in the habit of just practicing their communication in these ways through VR with different patient populations, and getting feedback on it, that we normalize that across their career, and that and we know from women's accounts that one bad experience can set the trajectory for the rest of their healthcare, right? They see one doctor and it's terrible and they lose all trust. Or I've talked to women who had bad birthing experience and never wanted to have children again. Like that one interaction, I think I want to stress that one interaction can mean the world. So I think if we get them early, that's best. As far as the training in an ideal world, one thought is that they could get the trait, like Dr. Maurice was saying, and when they start clinical rotations within that rotation. Another thought is, maybe it's a part of continuing medical education that they have to do these kinds of trainings often, or that certain medical schools adopt an approach where every so often they have to practice through the application their communication skills with diverse patients. And maybe they get a random, like maybe one time it's a Black maternal health patient, maybe one time it's in the context of primary care and mental health or something like that. I think just making it, normalizing the practice and the feedback, I think to me, can have both short-term and long-term effects.
I also think it's like the comfort with the technology too. I think that's very, very important. I see this training becoming standardized one day, and then almost it's similar to CPR training that every physician has to go through. This is like a requirement throughout your career that you have to continue to do it. And, the initial iteration that we have here is more for our learners. And that was kind of the focus as this evolved from the preliminary studies that, well, let's get the medical students involved in this. And I'm so lucky to have the dean of our medical school be so supportive in this. When he heard about this, he was immediately excited about it, and he did everything within his power to help us get this thing rolling. And we have it going currently at our 2 campuses. Creighton has a campus here, a medical school campus here in Omaha, and we have a second medical school in Phoenix, Arizona. So both sites are up and running. But I think it's, as Dr. Thompson was pointing out, it's getting these learners a part of this early on in their career and just make it as ubiquitous as the training as you have to do surgical simulation, you have to do CPR training, you have to have ACLS. It's just one of the things that you do as a physician or healthcare provider to help provide care to patients.
Great. So we have a question here. We're going to circle back a little bit to design choices. So you talked a little bit about how for phase 3, right now you're just in the prototype stage, and you've been using videos, they're less expensive. So there is a question here about why using avatars is more expensive. But I want to sort of expand that a little bit because you talked about using generative AI to sort of control that virtual patient perhaps, or to generate their language. Would you imagine moving to avatars if you had the ability to, or is there something about the sort of video approach, aside from cost, that you feel like you would want to retain?
Yeah, great questions. Avatars these days are getting way better. And then secondly, at least with our VR friends on the team, one thought was to do 360 video and then use something like photogrammetry, which I'm not an expert in, but seems like a way to manipulate, actual videos. Avatars, the question here is avatars are more expensive. From my understanding is that it's because they have to be created from scratch, like online renderings and drawings, whereas you can take a video and manipulate it. And I think the development time is just way more when it comes to developing avatars, unless you use some that have already been created, which there are, I'm aware, many development companies who you can sort of get avatars in a box, so to speak. That's a good question. Moving forward, I don't object to avatars, particularly as they get better and virtual environments get better. For me, it's a combination. All things are sort of give and take. And so the cost part and the realism was really great for the 360 video. But as we move towards generative AI and we need something that's much more responsive and you can't have like a delay because of the video switching, I'm totally open to that. I think for me, it's preserving and trying to balance sort of the realism so it resonates and it's credible with having conversational guardrails around the AI to make sure it doesn't inadvertently, we know that AI can be biased itself. So can we put some guardrails around it as well? And to simulate a natural conversation in this context, which is what those guardrails would also be good for. And then also making sure that the skills that we teach and the feedback we give is grounded in theory and research. So ideally, the learner would have this conversation or do this postpartum visit, and then someone else would come in into the application and say, these are the things that you did great, right? You did a good job of expressing empathy, which is, naming the emotion, explaining why it's valid, and then helping them reframe. Those are the scientific ways you're supposed to express empathy. And then here's some better things that you could do, right? Something like that is sort of my dream, but it's balancing all those things. But I'm open to that, especially as it progresses.
Right. So something I would like to have your thoughts on. A lot of times as people are embarking on a project, it could be like this one, it could be use of VR for some other purpose. It's sort of a small team, and oftentimes they're like, okay, we'll make it a go. I think you did a really nice job of amassing, a transdisciplinary team with folks from across many, many domains that could inform and help create sort of a best possible product. It's a hard thing to do. So I was hoping that the two of you could talk a little bit about that process and sort of how you found collaborators, brought the team together, and identified, folks to fill various roles on the team.
I guess I'll take that one. It's just an interesting story just about collaboration with colleagues. And about 4 to 5 years ago, I was in Champaign, Illinois, helping the Carle Illinois College of Medicine start their residency program. And this is where one of our colleagues who's a consultant, who I've known for 20 years, is a Black OBGYN. She's been in the community for years and years and years. And as a part of starting a residency program, you have to have a robust research component, which is also something that I was building up. And she was working with Dr. Thompson on this pilot project. And she had asked my colleague, Dr. Dillard, well, are you interested in, being a part of the research and writing papers and things like that? And Dr. Dillard said, oh, no, I don't do any of that. You better talk to Dr. Maurice. That's his thing. So it's that sort of combination, that bringing together of different specialties. And it was Dr. Thompson who knew the people at AirV Labs and that can help us do that. And so it's just like, the collegiality of this multidisciplinary group, and how, as separate entities, we could have never have done this, but all entities coming together has brought something that's really kind of exciting. And, 4 years ago, if you would have told me like we'd be doing a webinar on this, I would have said, you're crazy. This is like a one and done. But it's just kind of evolved, and it's just kind of the excitement about, academic centers, whether it's at University of Illinois Champaign Urbana or here at Creighton. It's just that commitment to academic excellence and trying to move things forward, and taking a problem that we need to address and looking at it in a cogent, serious sort of way. So it's just, again, to answer your question, it's just meeting people, talking to people, finding out what their interests are, and seeing if you could collaborate.
Wonderful. There was sort of a question comment about the avatars, pointing out that there are several avatars in the box. I'll just weigh in here and say, from my perspective, on the avatar video question, it often is the animation that is the really hard and expensive part of using avatars and making that animation look plausible, whereas humans obviously do that naturally. So that's my take on it as to why it can be so much more expensive. I think that we probably have time for about one more question. So I will ask it. And I want to hear sort of about, this is your first, the way you're talking about this is your first sort of area of Black maternal health. You talked about maybe going out into pain. What is your vision for the whole scope of this project? Are you hoping to incorporate a lot of different clinical interactions? Are you hoping to sort of keep the types of interactions small, but a smaller set of cases, but maybe incorporate more learnings? Sort of what's your idea for the scope of what this will eventually become?
I think standardizing the process, finding something that works, and then just expanding it. That's why, we've had success with the Black maternal health, and this is why we got a new grant here from Creighton. They want us to take a look at Black patients and their pain, which is another area where, women are being discriminated against. And then we also want to open it up to other underserved populations. Dr. Thompson and I have been working on scripts for other underserved populations. There's the Hispanic population, there's the LGBTQ community, and also out in Champaign, Illinois, where Dr. Thompson is, and here in Omaha, Nebraska, there's the rural population, which is frequently overlooked. So I think that the objective is to find something that works, a way to make these videos and make them interactive and have an effect, and then just kind of taking that formula right there and applying it to other populations and different areas where they're discriminated against.
Absolutely. Get the science right, so to speak, and then change the context and patients, and then also for different learners. I mean, we know nurses provide a lot of care. Some of the few, and if you've seen others, please let me know, some of the few more communication training based VR specifically come out of nursing, which in some ways doesn't surprise me. A lot of the medical stuff is focused on surgery and anatomy, but some of the nursing literature is working on what are often called soft skills, right? But I think it's important to bring that to the medical space as well. But that doesn't mean, that means like maybe some great allies in nursing that I need to hook up with, and what are some other allied health professionals that interact a lot with disparity populations? Like, what about our folks who work in dialysis centers or places like this? Or I'm interested in fat bias as well. What about some like dietitians and nutritionists? Like, how can we help some of our allied health professionals as well?
Great. Well, thank you again for this wonderful talk and all of your really thoughtful answers to the questions. I'm going to hand it back to Jennifer to close us out.
So just to say thank you to our moderator, Dr. Persky, and our speakers, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Maurice, and to everyone for attending today's meeting. Please remember, if you are interested in joining or contributing to the MXR initiative at MDIC, please contact me at jwaters@mdic.org, and that information is in the chat. And then just thank you again. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.